All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. We are looking forward to a really great session. Please note that you do have the ability to ask questions via the chat function, which you should find in your toolbar. Everyone is on mute. However, at the end, we will have a question and answer session where we will field questions from the chat box. So along the way, if you think of something during the presentation, please just type it in the chat box and we'll certainly address all of your questions at the end. So now I will turn it over to our speaker, and he will provide a little background on himself, and we can get right started into the presentation. So thank you so much, Cyrus, for joining us today and presenting to our students.
Thank you, Cassandra. It's a real pleasure and honor to be able to take part in this dialogue and have an opportunity to present to your students. I've heard very good things about your program and about South and all of the different work that you guys are doing. So again, for this opportunity to come and speak to this group. So my name is Cyrus Batheja. I am currently a registered nurse. I hold a public health certification, specifically in nursing, and I have my MBA with a focus in finance. And I'm currently a candidate for my doctoral degree in a small private university here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I live with my family. My lovely wife and two kids, one 3 and one 6, and have come really to speak to you guys today a little bit about my background and my opportunity to really create some meaningful difference within the United States and within the nursing profession. Currently, I hold a position as a national leader within the corporate headquarters of United Health Group. We are a Fortune 14 organization focused on not only health insurance, but also clinical services. And I also am a small business owner. So my wife and I own assisted living facilities around the Twin Cities area, which is Minneapolis, St. Paul. And we also own a home health agency that we developed back about 7 years ago. So, really, again, looking forward to being able to give you guys an opportunity to learn a little bit more about my story and, really what has helped me to become a leader within the United States in the healthcare sector. If you want to jump to the next slide, Cassandra. So today, what I'm going to be talking a little bit about, I want to make sure that we level set to start the conversation. So we'll start by defining the concept of culture. I'll present a narrative about coming to America, a little bit more about needs, wants, and desires of myself as a young U.S. immigrant. Speak to managing culture shock that I experienced and some of the psychological stress that was involved in that. And then look at overcoming culture shock and really looking at myself in current, in the current state, and helping, potentially helping you to maybe pick a career path and understand a little bit more about ways to really define yourself. Then looking specifically at a tool, the synergistic leadership model. I like to make sure that, we'll start with background, but I want to make this applicable. I want to give you guys something to help you. So this tool was something that is particularly important to my progression through my profession, and so I think that you should find that to be quite interesting. We'll have a small debriefing session, talk a little bit about some conclusions, and then I'll provide some general references and have some time for question and answer. Do you want to go to the next slide for me there, Cassandra? So let's talk a little bit about culture. Basically, culture, the concept of culture has two components. There's a subjective component and objective component to culture. Subjectively speaking, culture is the sum of the psychological, the assumptions, values, and patterns of thinking that we have. What do we feel it to be? And each person is going to see culture a little bit differently. but it's really based on your experiences within, where you've come from. So if we are coming from New York City, your subjective view of culture is going to be different than if you are growing up in Iowa and how you define culture. Objectively speaking, we have institutions and artifacts that we can say this defines a culture, and this could be things like economic systems. The Dow Jones Industrial Average would be a good example of that. It could be social customs. So, maybe in Japan, bowing to others when you're meeting them. Political structures, whether communist or democratic. Processes that we might encounter. Arts, crafts, literature. All of these things are what they are, I guess is the best way that I can put it. They're objective, and we can pick them up, we can feel them, they're very tangible. In contrast, we have own perceptions of these things, and that's very subjective. Do you want to go to the next slide for me, please, Cassandra? So another way to look at culture, again, just a kind of a graphical representation, and I like to try to make sure that, I put things in a couple different ways so that we really understand. So we all, in our core, have some basic assumptions. Our assumptions about existence and survival, these are things that, we learned as we grew, things that helped us to get to where we are, things that helped you to pick South University as your plan. And from there, we look at our social norms and values. What kinds of things are in our society that help us to understand who we are as people and as a culture? And this would be things like written laws. This is defined that, we don't make loud noises or have loud music, after a certain time in the night. Social control, what is good and what is bad. These things are set. And then we have the opportunity for artifacts and products, which we would consider to be explicit. Again, this is what we defined as objective in the last slide, but these are part of our observable reality. So language is a very important part of culture, probably one of the most important defining factors of a culture. And, again, it's how we speak to one another. And it's not only English versus Spanish, but really the dialect in which we speak. So if we think about, how, and I, like I said, I work in a national role. So I work across, basically 50 different states. So when I'm working with the folks on the East Coast in my Northeast region, they have a very different culture than, when I'm working with folks, for example, in Hawaii. Things that we would, discuss and our approach to working with those populations and addressing health concerns of the Hawaiians or, folks within the Navajo Nation in Arizona or New Mexico or the Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn. We take all of these things into consideration and, whether it's language, food, architecture, and fashion, all of these different things are very important. And as you can see, I use this within my day-to-day work. It helps me to meaningfully impact the populations that we serve on a day-to-day basis. So culture forms the root of our actions. It's man-made, it's confirmed by others, it's conventionalized, and it's passed on from generation to generation and from one person to another. If you want to go to the next slide, Cassandra. So what happens when we leave our culture? This is an important thing because as I talk a little bit about my story, it's important for you guys to understand, what happens. And so, really, you have a multicultural mixture that can occur. And there's one of two options that are going to happen when you have groups come together. One is that you live side by side. And I think that this is best defined by, some of the work that I'm doing currently in New York. We have a variety of different populations we serve. I mentioned the Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn. We have a dense population of Russian folks who live right next door. And we find that in many ways, these cultures have very little interaction with one another. And next to them, we have a very dense Hispanic population. Again, so, this is a good exemplar of folks living side by side. And I'm sure you all can think of different examples of cultures living side by side. Alternatively, you have cross-cultural interaction where you see people of many different cultures living together. And this concept has been defined as acculturation, and the process of really, either, accepting somebody not only, from a standpoint of I appreciate your culture, but actually integrating and living, as a single people. Let's go to the next slide, Cassandra. So cultures can be distinguished from each other by differences in shared meaning. When we're living side by side, what the research has found is we really limit ourselves to what we know from our own culture, only. When we're living together, we search for the existence of mutual beliefs, shared values. And so as an action, we can discuss cross-cultural experiences in a narrative form and engage in the process of critical reflection. And that's exactly what I hope to be able to do as we continue to move through the slides and the remainder of my presentation, is I'm going to give you a narrative, my narrative, of coming to America and what I've seen, and then really look at it from a critically reflective standpoint and understand a little bit more. Cassandra, if you want to go to the next one. So the needs, wants, desires, and barriers encountered by a young U.S. immigrant. This is the part where I get into my story and really start to talk a little bit about what I experienced. So I'm going to take you guys back in time to 1984 when I got on a plane from England, and I was with my mother and my father, and we left everything that we knew behind from the country we were coming from, and came to the United States with great hopes of prosperity. We landed in Minnesota with the desire to have a business which would sell wicker furniture and rugs. And for the folks who know about Minnesota, it's not necessarily an ideal environment for wicker furniture, which is typically outdoor type furniture. We get into sub-zero temperatures in the winter and, a lot of snow and ice and bad weather. So when we came to the U.S., we came on a business visa, which allowed us to be in the country, really to, our purpose, quote unquote, in the country was to run this business and to, contribute to our society through this, wicker furniture business. We very quickly learned that Minnesota was not a good place to operate, and the business didn't work. And what we then did was really looked at, what are our opportunities to be able to stay in the country? And that business that we had, my father's business, and the business visa, it allowed us to run that business, but my mother, for example, couldn't have a job. I couldn't hold any employment. I could go to school because obviously that's what the law dictates, and we talked about culture earlier. That's a cultural expectation that anybody under a certain age goes to school under 17 or 18. They go to school, so I could do that, but that was a limitation for me. And I always had a need and a desire to be able to work and contribute to our society, but I wasn't able to do that because of some of the barriers that I encountered around immigration law. What we came to find after our business didn't work, and this was after a number of years of being in the country, was that there was a nursing shortage, and that nursing actually granted an opportunity for us to find a path to obtaining permanent residency, or what's commonly known as a green card. And then from there, that's a stepping stone to getting to citizenship. And I remember, walking to the grocery store with my mom as a child and wishing upon a star that one day we would be able to, have that equality of obtaining a green card and being able to, work in the country and vote and, have that stability and peace of mind that comes with knowing that we wouldn't have to leave on a plane to go back to where we came from the next day. And so, that was always, something that resonates with me. I mean, it's something that drives me and motivates me on my worst days, is the fact that, we were able to achieve that. And so if you think about that background, you can imagine the psychological stress, for a youngster, dealing with that and not being able to, completely be open to and honest to, what was happening as a youth living in the United States. And at the same time, as dealing with that psychological stress of not knowing what was going to happen and quite frankly, many days being embarrassed that, I couldn't talk to people about, where I was from or what I was, what my background was. But then also managing the cultural shock that, as we had talked about in the beginning of the presentation and as we define culture, understanding that, there was a vast difference between where I came from and, the culture that I was living in now. The rules were different. The traditions were different. I mean, Thanksgiving, I had no idea what that was. And so I had out, and I remember, there was, it was all about relationships and being able to, to have other people, trust other people that they were telling me the right thing. So, all of that kind of mixed together. But through all of it, I always appreciated diversity. I mean, it was the one thing that, I was able to connect with on an ongoing basis. This place that we live now was full of people who had, a variety of different things to offer me, whether it was the Hmong population, the Somali population, the folks who had been, living in the country, my best friends. And that appreciation for diversity really helped me to overcome the culture shock and to, start to move in a positive direction. So when I think about what drives me today, it is all of the things that I just described to you. And so, what I want to make sure I express is one important factor. We all, have purpose in life. And this is getting at what I found to be my purpose, my personal, mission, if you will, in life was one, I went through all these things, and as I was going through them, I didn't know, how it was going to turn out. Now I have an opportunity to critically reflect on that and say, okay, so what the heck happened to me over the past 20 years, and how did I get to the place that I'm at now? And then, really using those experiences to drive my future mission and vision of helping people to really feel like equals and having the opportunities that, in many cases, I didn't always have. And, I'm going to talk a little bit later about the synergistic leadership model, but it's always focused by purpose. And, I was meeting with a pretty well-respected and well-known theorist and author, Richard Leider, not too long ago. And one of the things that he brought to me was, Cyrus, I have surveyed a lot of different people and asked people about, if they could do their life over again, what would it be that they would change? One of the things that people have consistently brought to him is, I wish I defined my purpose in life sooner, along with a few other things. I wish I took more risks, specifically in career-oriented risks. But, that's something that I want to make sure that I leave you with, is that, it's not easy to find purpose in life, and some people, will find it later than others. But critical reflection is a process in which it can help you to define what it is that's actually driving you on a day-to-day basis and, give you that perspective and focus that you need to be able to accomplish your vision or your dreams in a similar way to what I'm doing now. Not to say that I've accomplished all my dreams, but certainly I understand what I want to be able to accomplish, and that's the first step in being able to do it. Cassandra, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is essentially the trajectory that I went through. I put this together, as I thought about my story and some of the steps that I took to get to where I am today, and I'm going to walk you through it because there's a little bit more depth here than what I kind of went over. So where we left off in my narrative, in my story, was that we discovered this path to permanent residency, which was nursing. So my mom took it on. She said, Cyrus, I am going to go to school, as a first-generation immigrant, she's never gone to school in Western Hemisphere. She was at that time a single mother, but she wanted to make sure that my life was sound. So she stepped up and she joined a 2-year highly competitive nursing program. It was an associate degree in nursing that she went paying, and she managed to make it through that program and get to a point of getting our permanent residency, our naturalization is what it's defined as, and starting a career in care and really becoming an inspirational leader to myself. And so through that inspiration and understanding, and as you can imagine, we didn't have much money. I mean, our finances were extremely limited because we couldn't work in the country. I really didn't have much of a hope of ever being able to go to college. But I spent many days with my mom at that community college, sitting in the back of the classroom, listening to lectures because she couldn't leave me at home, going to the biology lab, many days in the party room of our apartment building, laying on the couch and letting her and her friends practice, setting up their IV lines and all of that stuff. And it rubbed off on me. And I knew that, if I ever had the opportunity to go to college, I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to follow in that track, and I wanted to become a registered nurse. And sure enough, that's exactly what I did. And I actually went through the same nursing program as my mother about 8 years after she did. And it had some of the same instructors that she did that remembered me as a child coming to their classes, which was a really cool way to connect the dots and kind of, again, bring back some of those memories. So that happened in '99. I joined the nursing program and then, really started to build my dreams, because all of a sudden now, here I am in college, never thought that was going to be possible, never thought I had question marks, most of my childhood, whether or not I was ever going to be able to stay in the United States, leave aside, go to college or have a job or anything else. But when I started to do that, I quickly appreciated and was grateful for the opportunity that I had, and I wasn't going to let that go. So I knew I was going to be a long-term student. I wasn't going to stop at a 2-year degree. I knew that for sure. But I also started to say, hey, how can I give back to society? Because ultimately, it was this society that supported my mother and I in getting our dreams, of becoming and our wish, that day that we wished upon a star, having that wish come true. How can I start to give back? And I started to identify gaps in social process. Things like, doing my practicum in nursing homes and not really being satisfied with what I was seeing. Even though I was just a student, I could clearly say, hey, this is not, what I would necessarily want for my folks. And, so through that mechanism, I built my dream. As I finished my nursing school, became a registered nurse with a 2-year degree, I needed to continue. And so I earned credibility. And again, this happened real time. And, now I critically reflect back on it. But I started to look at things like obtaining my bachelor's degree, which I did, obtaining public health nursing certification, obtaining my MBA, and really looking at, what are the meaningful outcomes that I can create within the communities that I'm serving. So that was in 2005. In 2005, I also started to strive for success because now I'm in the nursing community. I've started to earn an income, and I finished, one degree, and I've stepped into another degree, and I'm plugging away and starting to really build myself and my career. And as I'm doing that, I'm making sure that I'm understanding the basics of, where gaps lie and where I might be able to develop innovation. So, for example, for a period of time, I was a regional director for an assisted living facility, and I was teaching all of their staff policies and procedures, state-oriented policies and procedures. And, I wasn't always satisfied with what I was seeing within the organization that I was at. But I took those learnings and I actually was able to apply them, also, some relationships and connections I had and understandings of economics and finance. And I was able to develop a business case as well as have the strategic foundation to develop my own assisted living foundation, assisted living buildings. And, from there, I then started to feel like I was controlling my own destiny. That, I wasn't, getting pushback from the, executives on doing certain things because it impacted the bottom line negatively. But I could do these things because it connected with my own mission, my own vision, and what I was hoping to be able to do and give back. So as we think about then moving into 2010 and through today, okay, I developed that model, and through that innovative model, a community care-oriented model, I was able to create some really meaningful differences within the communities that we serve. And what that objectively means is that through our facilities, and because I had the control to make decisions in ways that maybe I couldn't have in my previous roles, we took on some of the state's most challenging clients, folks who really were offered no alternatives, were in state facilities or institutionalized members, mental institutions, psychologically locked wards, those sort of things, and create a therapeutic milieu, an environment where these folks could thrive, right? And, there's been a lot of tears shed over the years, but really having a family-style approach and caring for people in the way that I care for myself or my family, and it comes out of my culture, it comes out of my background, it comes out of my story, right? That this was embedded in what I was looking to be able to do. So what I then was able to have happen, and again, this was not necessarily planned, but, through this chronology that I've talked to you guys about, I was invited into a role where they said, hey, we're seeing what you're doing in Minnesota, and that's really cool stuff that's happening there. Can you help us to do that on a national within a really big organization within United? So, I took that opportunity on, and that's where I find myself today. I continue to go to school today. So like I said, I'm a doctoral candidate. I'm in my dissertation. I'm completing my work. It's around healthcare leadership and understanding some of the dynamics of healthcare leadership at an executive level. And and looking at things like population health, really having a national perspective on things like Medicaid, Medicare, working with CMS. So that's, really the governing body in D.C. that oversees, millions of lives. And having the opportunity to take, what's important to me and what we used to develop the foundational business, the core competencies, and now scaling that nationally in a number of different ways, whether it's deploying nurse practitioners into members' homes. We call the folks who are part of our health plans, who have our insurance, our members. But I'm on the side of the business that is around clinical innovation and quality. So really looking at ways to improve the quality of health for the people that we serve. From a business standpoint, it's important because it drives down costs, not only for our insurance group, but more importantly for the government. And so the government has contracted with us to help us to improve population health. And that's the work that I lead within United. Other programs that we have, so I was talking about the Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn. This is, a local program that we have. We have contracted with Uncle Moishi and the Mitzvah Men, which is a Jewish entertainer, child entertainer, to help to educate the population on the importance of well checks and signs and symptoms of conditions that would impact children. Other things that we do in other pockets of the country, we have a program that is focused on connecting people to care and removing social barriers that they might encounter, whether that's transportation-oriented barriers, daycare-oriented barriers, food-oriented barriers. I saw a really cool program today. One of our directors sent in to us from one of our health plans, one of our markets, around when folks go in and have their well check done, or a mammography, or cervical cancer screening, we offer them incentive to get natural and whole foods. And so at a farmer's market that we sponsor. And so, we've got a variety, a catalog of different programs that we deploy. But, each one of those programs, when I look at them, I look at them through the lens of my story, my background, my culture. If we could go to the next slide, Cassandra. So what are the key learnings from my story and, really coming out of my career? So first and foremost, relationships are the single most critical thing that has gotten me to where I am today. It doesn't matter if it's related to obtaining my, coming to America was based on a relationship. Obtaining a green card, I told you that an attorney had advised us that nursing was the path. Had we not had that relationship, I would not be having this conversation with you today. Whether it was, starting my business and being able to understand policies and procedures and make those state-oriented connections, whether it was being offered a role within the Fortune 14 company that I'm in, strictly based on relationships. Having the opportunity to speak to you today was directly related to a personal relationship that I have with one of your leaders within your organization. So always, make sure that you understand and value your relationships. And, obviously there's ups and downs with any relationship. But, that has been crucial and critical to my journey and honestly to my success. Offer gratitude, and so it not only is good for the person receiving the gratitude, but many times we don't realize, but offering gratitude makes us feel good about ourselves. And it's funny, today actually, our system has, we started a new program within United that is a formal appreciation type system where you can, nominate somebody for doing something really above and beyond, and they get a certain amount of points associated with that. And I took time, I stopped, I took pause in my day today, and just really thought about who has helped me, because I can't do my work independently. I'm dependent on many, many people. But who over the last week or months has been particularly helpful, or that I wanted to offer gratitude to, and I sent off a bunch of those today, and it felt really good. Not only for I'm sure that those people appreciated that, but also for myself to be able to say, hey, I took this opportunity to do that. Something that my mom always has instilled in me, and is particularly important, is that taking the honest approach, the high road, is the best way to do it. And sometimes that's really hard. And as a leader, the times when leadership is most important, I would say really the only time that leadership is important is during change. When change happens, it's scary. And that is when you have the opportunity as a leader to be able to step up and make a meaningful difference. And so, that's something to keep in mind. And hold to what you say. Hold to your values, and that's where the integrity comes into play. Second point that was brought up by Richard Leider. So the first one, when we look back on our lives, when we become older adults, this is where he surveyed. First point that I had brought up earlier in our dialogue. I wish that when I was younger, I had more purpose. I understood purpose. The second thing that Richard brought up was, I wish I would have taken more risks, specifically related to my career. And so take those risks. Obviously calculated, but change is hard. Risks are change-oriented, but realize that, for your dreams to come true, you have to take risks. And think back on my story when those things happen, and think about, the fact that my folks left everything behind that they had to take a risk to come to the United States, which paid off in dividends. But really, we had, no way of knowing what was going to happen, and things became pretty hairy along the way. But I'm so appreciative for the outcomes of that. And, my father-in-law always says this, and I remember him for this: crawl, walk, run. It's the basic, physiology, but also, from a psychological standpoint, no matter what you're facing, and sometimes we go through the process faster, and in some cases we revert, and that's the natural cycle of life as well. That eventually we go from running to only being able to walk, and that, in many days, we've got aches and pains, and eventually then, we may not even be able to walk anymore. We may, revert back to being in a wheelchair or worse. But, just keeping this in mind, and especially on days where it might be a struggle, that, it's one foot in front of the other, one step at a time, and that's always helped me. And then soon enough, you're off and you're sprinting to the finish line. Do you want to hop to the next slide for me, Cassandra? Oh, we missed one. So here's a tool that's been useful for me. And it may be useful for you, and I think, if you can use it, then that's great. So this is something that I've defined. It's called the synergistic leadership model. And in the center is my purpose. And like I said, I was lucky to be able to define my purpose in life. And it's really around creating equality and inclusion. Really looking back at what I was not included in. And, many days how I felt like I wasn't an equal. And trying to help others to not have to deal with that situation, or including them in ways that they might not have been included, and making them feel equal. And then connecting the dots, here are the 4 key pillars of my life: my family, my role as a corporate leader, my education, and me as a business owner and as a business leader within my community. And then, simply within each one of the 4 satellites, identifying characteristics of those 4 traits or those 4 key areas and identifying the connections between. So when I can demonstrate this to you from the way that I look at it. So as a business person, I serve the community and the government and come up with innovative ways to do things. That has been important to me within my corporate role because I carry those learnings over and use those as I execute with intention to the communities that I serve across the country. And you can see the synergy that's starting to be created. Then we look at the education satellite, that education piece down at the bottom, and you can see that there's an interconnection there as well. That my focus there is around healthcare and leadership, community orientation, and I can use my learnings within my local business as a corporate leader to help me to define my dissertation work and understand what I want to be able to accomplish through my education. So again, another interconnection and a synergy. My kids call my wife and I community helpers because I'm very hands-on with what I do here. We have a team, an awesome team of people who implement, our vision and do the work with folks. But I take pride in actually going and visiting with the people that we're caring for, whether that's, in our homes or in the community. Getting to know them like they were my own family. I bring my kids with me. We bring our dog with us, as long as it's appropriate. And we, really engage the community through that single kind of mentality. So you can see now how my family, and my kiddos understand the value of education. They see me studying. They come to class. I explain to them why it's important for me to continue my education. So there's interconnections between my 4 most important things that are happening within my life, and all centered by my purpose, but all interwoven. And that is the basic methodology of the synergistic leadership model. Cassandra, if you want to hop to the next slide. So valuing diversity and multicultures, and inevitably we live in a global village, we live in a global community, and so really by scrutinizing our assumptions, because sometimes our assumptions are the single most dangerous thing that we have, we develop skills in which allow us to interact freely with all people regardless of color, gender, age, sexual orientation, profession. I mean, we break through these boundaries and we live as a single people. I challenge you to be an ambassador of the change of diversity, right? Of appreciating diversity. How we think about our life situation impacts how we feel and act towards others. And I think I've built that case, demonstrated that through my personal narrative, and given you a tool to at least see how I function through the synergistic leadership model. So that's my challenge to each one of you today is, when you may have these assumptions about what you feel a group of people or a specific person, may be doing or being, challenge your own assumption and try to look at it from, their eyes. And, maybe my story will help you to be able to better do that. My narrative, because again, the purpose was to tell you my narrative, explain to you how I've, gotten to where I've gotten and what I've been able to accomplish, and critically then reflect on that. We can go to the next slide, Cassandra. So conclusions, culture matters. Sometimes it's funny to me that I may be in a particular place, meeting, or even in class or other places, and folks feel like, hey, I am an American. Well, the reality is, yes, we're all Americans, and at one point, outside of the Native Americans, we all had family members who migrated here and probably felt similar to the way I felt when I came to this country. And that cross-cultural life, it is beneficial. That is essentially the roots and the foundation of all of the benefits and things we enjoy in this country. It's all come out of that. Engage in critical reflection, just like we have today through our dialogue. Respect, value, and hear yourself and others. And finally, appreciate multiculturalism. It's important. It's important to me, and I hope it's important to you as well. And Cassandra, I think that might be close to the final slide. There might be one more. So after all, it's a democratic process. Out of many come one. This is foundational to the premise of the United States. And of many states emerge a single nation. So out of many people, races, religions, ancestries, emerge a single people and nation. So I believe that is the conclusion. So I appreciate you joining, obviously, and on my journey of critical reflection. For many years, I was never even comfortable really telling my story until I earned my green card and my citizenship. But it's been fun to be able to speak a little bit about it. And thank you to South for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about this and to critically reflect myself and learn a little bit more about myself as I talk to you. So with that said, I am happy to answer some questions. I know we've got about 8 minutes left here in this gathering, so please feel free to shoot any questions that you might have over.
And again, you can ask questions using the chat box. And while we're waiting for some student questions, I can certainly start us off. Thank you so much for sharing your reflective journey with us. It's so empowering to hear the stories of others and how you were able to really build your success, taking that approach of, crawl, walk, run. So we appreciate you so much. One of the questions that I have is you mentioned the importance of relationships, and I stress that to students that I work with through the career planning process all of the time. Is there any additional advice that you can provide on how to build relationships and kind of step outside of our comfort zone and kind of move into that multicultural or diverse area and build relationships with people that we might not normally interact with on a regular basis to develop some of those relationships that can help us to advance personally or professionally, even educationally?
Yep, no, that's an excellent question, Cassandra, and I have a couple tips on that. So one thing I would say is it's important to build mentoring type relationships. And when we talk about mentoring, within our culture, we think of it as really being a one-way street, one in which the mentor gives the mentee value, and that is the direction. But really, it is a two-way street. The mentor has as much of an opportunity. But pick out those people who you feel exemplify what it is you want to be, and then step up boldly and say, I would like to take an opportunity to meet with you and speak to you a little bit more about a particular skill that I'm looking to develop. And that's a very good icebreaker, because one, you've identified something that they're obviously good at, and you're offering gratitude, and then you're looking to be able to develop yourself. And many times, good leaders want to help others to develop. It's a key, for me, what I would consider to be a key hallmark of leadership. The other thing I would say is be able to articulate yourself in a short and succinct way, your, kind of purpose. And it doesn't have to be your life purpose, but, what it is you're looking to be able to accomplish. And from a career development standpoint, that's important. So, I've spoken to other groups in the past specifically around career development. And, what I've kind of said is, it's important to have an elevator speech. And I know it's somewhat cliche, but, if you can articulate in just a few words maybe a paragraph, if you had, the opportunity to speak to a high-level executive and say, here's how I can deliver value, here's what I'm looking to be able to accomplish, people seem to appreciate that. And, again, it all plays back to culture. So if you can understand, the culture, you're putting yourself at a strategic advantage. That would be the other, piece of advice I would offer there in building relationships. One, don't be scared to acknowledge where you can build yourself and develop those mentorship relationships. And two, be able to articulate what it is you are looking to accomplish in a succinct manner to help to spark the relationship. Does that answer your question, Cassandra?
Yes, thank you so much. We have another question that came in that asks, what was one of the greatest challenges that you faced in your professional growth?
Okay, so that's another really great question. So one of the things that was challenging for me was something that I termed taking 2 steps back to make one giant step forward. So for a long time, I was in a leadership type role, and when we started to look at the opportunity to start our business, I had to step back from my role as a corporate leader, and that was a scary feeling. But through that step back, I was able to take 2 strides forward. One, by developing my business, and second, by being invited to work at United, at a major, at the time it was a Fortune 25. We've since become a Fortune 14, but that one step backwards, which was a risk, we talked about risk, and challenge and change, but in the end, it resulted in me being able to take 2 steps forward. So sometimes, and it's not always the case, but sometimes it's important to take a step back in order to take 2 steps forward. And that could be a step back, for personal time and reflection. It could be a step back to return to school and pursue, something more. It could be a step back to start your own business and leaving something behind. But for me, at least, taking that step back resulted in me being able to take major strides forward later on. I hope that answered the question of the student.
Yes, and we will take one last question, and this is regarding time management. So given the story that you've shared with us and your journey, you have a lot on your plate. What advice can you offer to our students on time management and really making time to develop yourself professionally, still advancing academically, and making time for your family?
Yep. No, that's a really great question, and actually one that I'm asked very frequently. I was actually asked it today at lunch. I went out to lunch with somebody from a nonprofit group who serves meals to the community here locally, and he asked me that. So the synergistic leadership model is extremely important to that. Just having the interconnections across all of the different things that I do. So, I try to make sure that if I'm going to step up and make a commitment to do something, I carry it through. That's that piece of integrity that I talked about. But if I'm going to step up and make that commitment to do something, I make sure it fits into my synergistic leadership model and it connects with, the overall, purpose. That's one. The other part of it that is absolutely critical to my, ability to get through is really having a strong team of people and people that I can trust around me. I could never do what I do without that. So that's number 2. Number 3 is, being realistic with what I'm able to do and not overcommitting. And some cases, some days even, I feel like I might have overcommitted. So, I purposefully look at any opportunity that I have and really weigh it out. And in some cases, depending on how important the decision is, I will list off very simple, line down the middle of a piece of paper, benefits and negatives, and time management always comes into that. How much time is this going to take from my schedule? Literally, it's morning to night, and I always make time for my family in any decision that I make. Obviously they're a key to all of my successes I defined within, my journey and my story. So those would be the three key takeaways. Create synergies between what you do. Surround yourself with people who are optimistic, positive, and you can trust. And three, know your limits, know your abilities, and commit to things that you can hold to maintain your integrity.
Thank you so much. So we are out of time. If any students on the call have any additional questions for our wonderful presenter today, you can certainly send them to us via email. You will be receiving a follow-up email with a recording to today's event if you want to revisit and glean additional knowledge from listening to the presentation a second time around. We thank you again, Cyrus, for joining us tonight and sharing your story. We really appreciate it. And at this time, we will end the webinar session. Again, if you have any additional or follow-up questions, you can certainly respond to the follow-up email.
It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone.